Hello everyone, dear friends. Today's text will be on the topic of the Titanic, a very interesting and instructive story. Good luck to everyone and enjoy watching, and also don't forget to subscribe and like. The Dream Ship. It was the year 1912. The world was changing fast, and people were dreaming of bigger and greater things. One of these dreams was a ship called the Titanic. It was the largest, most luxurious ship ever built. People said it was unsinkable. Newspapers wrote that no storm, no wave, no accident could bring it down. Everyone wanted to see it, and everyone wanted to travel on it. The Titanic was built in Belfast, Ireland. It took more than 2 years to finish. The ship was like a floating palace. It had beautiful dining rooms, a swimming pool, a gym, and even a grand staircase made of fine wood and shining brass. The first-class rooms were like hotel suites, with soft beds, large windows, and rich carpets. Even the second and third-class rooms were better than on most ships of that time. When the Titanic was ready, thousands of people came to watch its first journey. It would sail from Southampton, England, to New York City, USA. The trip would take about a week. People from all walks of life bought tickets. Rich businessmen and famous people stayed in first class. Families who wanted to start a new life in America traveled in third class. Everyone was excited to be part of history. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic left Southampton. The sun was shining, and the sea was calm. The passengers waved to the people on the shore. Bands played music, children laughed, and couples stood together, dreaming of their new lives. Nobody could imagine that this beautiful ship would never reach New York. Among the passengers was Jack, a young artist who won his ticket in a card game. He had no money, but he had big dreams. In another part of the ship, Rose, a young woman from a rich family, was traveling with her fiancé. She didn't love him, but her family wanted her to marry him for money and status. Jack and Rose didn't know each other yet, but soon their lives would change forever. As the Titanic sailed into the open ocean, the crew worked hard to keep everything perfect. The captain, Edward Smith, was an experienced sailor. He had spent many years at sea and was proud to be in command of the most famous ship in the world. The first days of the trip were peaceful. People walked on the deck, enjoyed the fresh air, and talked about how wonderful the ship was. Some even said it felt like they were in a floating city. But in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, icebergs were drifting. Spring had come early that year, and more ice than usual was floating south from Greenland. Several ships had sent warnings to the Titanic, telling them to be careful. The crew received these messages, but the ship continued at full speed. After all, the Titanic was unsinkable, or so everyone believed. No one on board knew that this journey, which began with so much hope and joy, would soon turn into one of the greatest tragedies in history. The sea was calm now, but danger was waiting just over the horizon. A night in the cold Atlantic. The days passed quickly on the Titanic. Every morning, the sun rose over the calm, blue sea. Passengers enjoyed breakfast in the dining rooms, where waiters served eggs, toast, tea, and coffee. Children ran along the deck, playing games. Musicians played soft music in the afternoons. At night, the first-class passengers danced in the ballroom, while third-class passengers sang songs together. Everyone thought the journey was perfect. Jack loved exploring the ship. He spent hours on the deck, looking at the ocean and sketching in his notebook. Sometimes he saw Rose from far away, walking with her fiancé and her mother. She always looked beautiful, but also a little sad. Jack wondered why someone so young and rich would look unhappy. On the evening of April 14, the air grew colder. The sky was clear, and thousands of stars shone above the dark sea. The water was like glass, calm, silent, and endless. It was beautiful, but also strange. Some sailors felt uneasy. Experienced seamen knew that very calm water could mean icebergs were nearby, because waves usually broke against them. In the radio room, operators received several messages from other ships in the area. They reported large icebergs ahead. One ship, the Californian, even stopped for the night because the ice was too dangerous. The radio operators on the Titanic were busy sending messages from rich passengers to their friends and family in America. They wrote down the iceberg warnings, but the ship continued its speed, over 22 knots. The captain wanted to arrive in New York quickly, maybe even earlier than planned. At 11:30 p.m. most passengers were sleeping. Some were still awake, reading or talking quietly. The night was so peaceful that no one could imagine danger. Two lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, were in the crow's nest, high above the deck. They watched the sea carefully. The cold wind stung their faces. Suddenly, Fleet saw something dark in the water, straight ahead. It was huge, black, and shining in the moonlight. "Iceberg, right ahead," he shouted, ringing the warning bell 3 times. In the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch reacted instantly. He ordered, "Hard a starboard," and told the engine room to reverse the engines. The ship began to turn, but it was too late. Only 37 seconds after the warning, the Titanic scraped along the iceberg. The sound was like tearing metal. Most people didn't even feel it, but some heard a strange noise, a low, deep rumble. In the lower decks, water began to pour in. The iceberg had cut long holes in the ship's hull. 5 of the Titanic's watertight compartments were flooding. The ship was designed to stay afloat if 4 compartments were damaged, but not 5. The builders had said the Titanic was unsinkable, yet now it was fatally wounded. Captain Smith quickly arrived on the bridge. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, examined the damage. His face grew pale. "She will sink," he said quietly. "In less than 2 hours." At first, no one wanted to believe it. Passengers were told there was nothing to worry about. Some laughed, thinking it was just a small accident, but deep below, the cold sea was rushing in faster and faster. Up on deck, the crew began uncovering the lifeboats. There were only enough for about half of the people on board. No one had ever thought they would all be needed. The Titanic was starting to lean forward, just slightly, but enough for the crew to know the truth: the greatest ship in the world was going down. Jack stood on the third-class deck, watching the crew work. He felt the cold wind and smelled the sharp, salty air. Something inside him told him that the night was about to change forever. Panic on the decks. The cold night grew even colder. A sharp wind cut through the air, and the stars seemed brighter than ever. But below that peaceful sky, fear was starting to spread. Some passengers still didn't know anything was wrong. Others noticed that the ship was leaning forward more and more. The gentle tilt made walking slightly difficult. A few people even joked about it, thinking it was part of the adventure. Jack was standing near the railing when he saw Rose again. She was wrapped in a long, dark coat, and her face looked pale. She was with her mother, Ruth, and her fiancé, Cal. They spoke in low voices, but Jack could see the fear in their eyes. Rose looked at Jack for just a moment, their eyes met, and she seemed to want to say something. But Cal pulled her away toward the first-class lifeboats. At around 12:05 a.m. the first lifeboat was lowered. It had space for more than 60 people, but only 28 were inside. Many passengers didn't want to leave the warm, safe ship for a small boat on the freezing ocean. "This ship can't sink," some said. But Thomas Andrews and Captain Smith knew the truth: the Titanic was already dying. The crew tried to keep order. "Women and children first," they shouted. Some men kissed their wives and children goodbye, promising they would see them in New York. Others tried to hide their fear, smiling and telling jokes so their families wouldn't panic. But as the minutes passed, the tilt of the ship became stronger. People began to understand they might never see their loved ones again. In the third-class areas, chaos grew. The gates that separated third-class passengers from the upper decks were locked. Many didn't speak English well and didn't understand the orders. Mothers cried, holding their children tightly. Men pounded on the gates, shouting to be let through. Jack was among them. He helped an Irish family, a woman with 2 small kids, find another way up. They ran through narrow corridors, water already washing over their shoes. The freezing seawater burned like ice. Up on deck, the band kept playing soft music. Their job was to keep people calm. The sweet notes of violins and cellos floated in the cold air, but for many, the music only made the night feel more unreal. How could there be music when death was so close? At 12:45 a.m., flares shot into the sky, bright white lights asking for help. Far away, a ship was visible on the horizon. Passengers pointed to it, shouting, "We're saved." But that ship, the Californian, never came. Its radio was turned off for the night. As time passed, lifeboats began leaving faster. Some crew members forced people to get in, even if they didn't want to. "It's just a precaution," they said. But deep inside, they knew it was no longer a precaution, it was the only chance to live. Jack finally reached the first-class deck with the Irish family. A crewman stopped them, women and children only. Jack helped the mother and her kids into a lifeboat. The woman cried and reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "Go. I'll be fine," he said with a small smile. The boat was lowered, swinging above the black water before it splashed down and began to row away. Now the ship was leaning so much that people had to hold on to the railings to stand. Ice-cold water was covering the lower decks. The sound of it rushing in was terrifying, like an angry monster coming closer and closer. Somewhere in the darkness, heavy furniture slid across the floor, crashing into walls. Glass broke, metal groaned. The Titanic was suffering. Rose stood with Cal and Ruth near another lifeboat. Cal tried to push her inside, but she hesitated. Her eyes searched the crowd until she found Jack. For a moment, the noise, the shouting, and the wind disappeared. They just looked at each other. And then, a shout, "Lower away!" The lifeboat dropped toward the sea, carrying her mother but leaving Rose behind. She had stepped away at the last second. Jack pushed through the crowd to reach her. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but she shook her head. "I'm not leaving without you." He wanted to argue, but there was no time. Water was now pouring over the bow. Screams filled the air. The Titanic's nose sank lower, and the stern, the back of the ship, began to rise into the sky. The band still played, now a slow, sad hymn. Above them, the stars looked cold and indifferent. Below, the black ocean waited. Jack took Rose's hand. And together, they ran toward the stern, with hundreds of desperate passengers following. The final struggle. The freezing air cut through everyone's clothes. It was after 1:30 a.m. and the Titanic was now at a dangerous angle. The bow, the front of the ship, was deep under the water. The stern was lifted high into the sky, and the giant propellers could be seen shining in the moonlight. The deck was no longer flat. People had to cling to railings, ropes, and anything they could grab to stop themselves from sliding down toward the dark sea. Screams came from every direction. Some passengers were still trying to find lifeboats, but most of them were already gone. In the chaos, men and women fought to get to the last few boats. Crew members shouted, "Women and children first," but the rules were breaking. Fear was stronger than manners now. People pushed, shouted, and grabbed at each other. Jack held Rose's hand tightly. They moved toward the stern, stepping over ropes, luggage, and even broken pieces of wood. A man ran past them, carrying a child in his arms. Another slipped and fell, sliding down the tilted deck until he disappeared over the edge into the freezing ocean. The sound of the splash echoed in the cold night, followed by a scream that quickly went silent. Near the middle of the ship, lifeboat number 2 was being lowered. It had only a few empty seats left. Rose looked at Jack. "We could make it," she said, but Jack shook his head. "There's no time. And if you get in, I'm staying here." She understood. If she left, she might survive, but Jack wouldn't. Her heart hurt, but she stayed. At the stern, the band was still playing, but now their music was different, slow, almost like a goodbye. Some passengers stopped for a moment, just to listen. It was strange. In the middle of all this chaos, the music made the moment feel peaceful for a few seconds. One old couple sat together on a bench, holding hands, waiting for the end. They didn't try to run. They simply leaned on each other, tears in their eyes. The tilt grew steeper. Heavy chairs, tables, and suitcases slid down the deck, crashing into people. The sound of metal groaning was deafening, the Titanic's body was breaking. Somewhere deep inside the ship, explosions could be heard as boilers and pipes burst under the pressure of the water. Jack and Rose finally reached the very back of the ship. Hundreds of passengers were there, clinging to railings. The freezing wind whipped across their faces. Below them, the sea looked like an endless black hole. The smell of salt and cold iron filled the air. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, louder than anything before. The ship's lights flickered, then went dark for a few seconds. People screamed. The deck beneath them shook violently. Some thought the ship was about to sink all at once. In reality, the Titanic was breaking in half. The sound was horrifying, like a giant tree splitting, only 1,000 times louder. The stern rose even higher into the air, nearly vertical. The bow, already underwater, dragged the rest of the ship down. People lost their grip and slid toward the sea, hitting railings, falling into the icy blackness. Jack and Rose held on to the very last railing at the end of the stern. Jack shouted over the wind, "When we hit the water, kick away from the ship. Don't let the suction pull you under." Rose nodded, her face pale with fear. Around them, people were praying, crying, or screaming names of loved ones. Some kissed small photos before tucking them into their clothes. Then, the stern began its deadly fall. At first, it slid slowly back toward the sea. Then gravity took over, and the huge back part of the ship plunged down like an elevator falling through darkness. They hit the water with a giant splash, sending icy waves in every direction. The shock was brutal. The temperature of the water felt like knives stabbing every part of their bodies. Rose gasped for air, but it was hard to breathe. Around them, hundreds of voices screamed in pain from the cold. People kicked, tried to grab anything that floated, pieces of wood, barrels, chairs. Some reached lifeboats, but most were left in the freezing water. Jack pulled Rose to a piece of broken wooden panel. "Get on," he shouted. She tried, but it was too small for both of them. The wood sank when Jack climbed on. He let go. "You stay on it. You'll survive," he said through chattering teeth. The night was full of terrible sounds, people crying out for help, calling names, praying, and slowly, those voices began to fade. The ocean, cold and endless, swallowed them one by one. Rose lay on the wood, her hands numb, her breath coming in small clouds of steam. She looked at Jack, who was holding on to the edge, his lips blue, his eyes fixed on her. "Don't you let go," he whispered. The stars above looked cold and distant. The Titanic was gone, and the ocean was now their only world. The final hours and eternal memory. The decks of the Titanic were now flooded with icy water. The ship had a severe forward tilt, and the bow was almost completely submerged beneath the dark ocean. It seemed as if the great liner was fighting for its life, but its strength was fading with every passing second. The moonlight illuminated a haunting scene, small dots of lifeboats slowly drifting away into the darkness, surrounded by floating debris, broken furniture, suitcases, and belongings that once held the memories of passengers. Jack and Anna, still clinging to the stern, held on with all their strength. The metal structure groaned and rattled under the immense pressure. Many people around them were praying, crying, or saying their last goodbyes to loved ones. The clock was nearing 2:15 a.m. when a sound like a deep, echoing roar filled the air. The Titanic's hull split in two. It was terrifying and majestic at the same time. The enormous liner broke apart, the bow plunging quickly into the depths, while the stern rose high into the air for a brief, frozen moment. Those standing on the stern felt their bodies lift as the ship began its final plunge. Gravity took hold, and everything seemed to fall at once, railings, lifebuoys, even people who lost their grip. Jack grabbed Anna's hand tightly. "Hold your breath," he shouted over the deafening noise. The stern crashed back into the water with a massive splash, sending freezing waves over their heads. They were thrown into the Black Sea, surrounded by chaos, shouts, splashes, and the creak of breaking wood. The cold was unlike anything they had ever experienced. It felt like thousands of needles piercing their skin. Jack fought to keep Anna afloat, pushing away pieces of debris until he found a large wooden panel. "Get on it," he urged her. Anna climbed onto the floating board, shivering violently, while Jack held on to the edge, keeping his head above water. Minutes turned into an eternity. The cries around them slowly grew fewer and quieter, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the gentle lapping of waves. The Titanic was gone, swallowed by the ocean forever. Anna stared into the darkness, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Jack, will we survive?" Jack smiled faintly, though his lips were blue. "You will," he whispered. Hours later, the lights of a ship appeared on the horizon, the Carpathia. Survivors were pulled from the freezing water and lifted into safety. Anna searched every face, but Jack was nowhere to be found. Her heart broke, yet she knew he had saved her life at the cost of his own. Years later, Anna would often tell her children about that night, not just about the disaster, but about the courage, love, and sacrifice that shone in the darkest of hours. The Titanic lay at the bottom of the ocean, but its story, and the memory of those lost, lived on forever.